This is Chapter 33, The Great Depression and the New Deal, by Natalie, Meat, and Ryan. So, with the ongoing Great Depression and the new election coming up, each political party was looking for a capable candidate who would better the nation. The Republicans settled on Herbert Hoover, while Franklin D. Roosevelt, the governor of New York, caught the Democrats' attention with his charm as well as his patience, tolerance, and compassion, which he developed after contracting infantile paralysis, aka polio, just a decade earlier. Along with his character traits, his wife helped him become recognized and popular since she became involved with politics to help her sickly husband. She actually managed to become very influential all on her own, vouching for those less fortunate, drawing liberalists in her direction. She was also the conscience of the New Deal, which was developed by Roosevelt as he ran for office. With this plan, though vague and contradictory, he was able to win over many voters, leading him to be the next president. Once he came into office, Roosevelt went to work on trying to fix the nation's economy, starting with the banks. After calling for a nationwide banking holiday that would last a week, he and Congress worked closely together to come up with laws and new reforms to help or change the ones already in place. Congress's worry and panic reflected that of the rest of the nations. Because of this, they were willing to do anything to help the U.S. crawl out of the ditch it was in, leading them to give Roosevelt a large amount of power, which made outsiders upset since Congress was dominated by Democrats. Despite people's opinions, Congress continued to make and pass reforms, taking from past progressive ideas. As Europeans noticed change, they saw that the U.S. was barely implementing reforms that had already been enacted by Western European countries years earlier. As mentioned earlier, Roosevelt began with reformations of the bank. In 1933, Congress passed the Emergency Banking Relief Act, which had banks close their doors only to reopen them once again after he assured people their money would be safe. Along with that, the Glass-Steagall Banking Reform Act was passed, which made the public rely more on the banking system and ended banking failures by insuring individuals' deposits up to $5,000. He also planned to manage currency by having people turn in their gold to get paper money instead. He also planned for inflation, which would fix people's debt and stimulate new production, but that didn't work out after provoking sound money critics. He soon turned his focus directly on the people and their unemployment conditions. About 1 in 4 workers were jobless, and hoping to change it, he created the Civilian Conservation Corps, which gave young men jobs, and also created Federal Emergency Relief Administration, Agricultural Adjustment Act, Homeowners Loan Corporation, and Civil Works Administration. With all of the emergency relief measures that were taken, it was realized that in order to be truly successful, they'd need to be continued and also supplemented, especially with the threat of multiple demagogues. These demagogues consisted of Father Charles Coughlin, who was a social justice, but he also became an anti-Semitic fascist. Another was Senator Huey Long. He started the Share Our Wealth program, which promised many families to receive $5,000 at the expense of his chief lieutenant. There was fear of him becoming a fascist dictator until he was assassinated in 1935. And another was Dr. Francis E. Townsend, who went after senior citizens, promising to give them $200 a month. All of this led to Congress's authorization of Works Progress Administration, which created jobs for about 9 million people within 8 years. This opportunity allowed for the preservation of self-respect and the blossoming of talent and creativity.
Lives for women started to improve. They had new roles in society, which was an effect of their newly given right to vote. Eleanor Roosevelt was the first lady during this time, and she was a major women's activist, along with Frances Perkins, who became the first female cabinet member, who was the Secretary of Labor Forces, and Mary Bethune, who was the head of the Office of Minority Affairs. She also later on founded a college in Florida. There was also Ruth Benedict, who was an anthropologist and influenced many women by creating the culture and personality movement. There was also Pearl S. Buck, who wrote The Good Earth which was a beautiful novel about a Chinese farmer who earned a Nobel Prize. All of these women during this time greatly impacted women's roles and took huge steps in their careers. The National Recovery Administration was a very complicated program, but it helped industries, labor, and those who are unemployed. This brought on new rules such as maximum hours for laborers, minimum wages, and a right to choose their own representatives. There was also the Public Works Administration, which was intended to help with the recovery of industries and unemployment. It was run by the Secretary of the Interior, who was Harold Ickes, and this administration aimed to help with long-lasting recovery. It spent $4 billion on about 30,000 projects that included buildings, highways, and parkways. The 100 Days of Congress started up, and one of its first acts passed was the legalization of light beer and wine, which helped with prohibition. These drinks contained less than 3.2% of alcohol. This helped with the repeal of the prohibition with the 21st Amendment. Since the end of World War I, farmers were suffering, so Congress established the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. This paid farmers to reduce their crops, which essentially paid them not to do their jobs. For a while, this was successful, but as time went on, it ended up just increasing unemployment. It was ended by the Supreme Court in 1936. The New Deal Congress then passed the Soil Conservation and Domestic Allotment Act, which paid farmers to use less soil and plant things such as soybeans. A second Agricultural Adjustment Act, which still had conservation payments toward farmers, but it was improved upon. This act was finally accepted by the Supreme Court. Roosevelt wanted better homes, so he set up the Federal Housing Administration. It was there to help with building industries and loaning money to householders. It was so successful that it continued after his presidency. Congress expanded on this administration by creating the United States Housing Authority. It was designed to lend out money to states or communities when they wanted low-cost construction. The Social Security Act of 1935 was put in place by Congress. It created pension and insurance for those who really needed it. It was funded by the taxation of employers and employees.
Walkouts occurred in the summer of 1934 with the Wagner Act, aka the National Labor Relations Act of 1935, replacing the NRA. The Wagner Act guaranteed the right of unions to organize and collectively bargain with management. The National Labor Relations Board enabled unskilled laborers to begin to organize themselves into effective unions, one of which was John L. Lewis, the boss for Industrial Organization, CIO, later renaming itself the Congress of Industrial Organizations within the ranks of AFL in 1935. The CIO later left the AFL and won a victory against General Motors and the United States Steel Company, but smaller steel companies struck back, resulting in such incidences as the Memorial Day Massacre of 1937 at the plant of the Republic Steel Company of South Chicago, in which the police fired upon the protesters and workers, leaving many killed or injured. In 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act, aka the Wages and Hours Bill, was passed, setting up a minimum wage and maximum hours standards and forbidding children under the age of 16 from working. The Republicans nominated Kansas Governor Alfred M. Landon to run against FDR. Landon was weak on the radio and weaker in personal campaigning, and while he criticized FDR's spending, he also favored enough of FDR's New Deal to be ridiculed by the Democrats as an unsure idiot. Roosevelt won in a huge landslide with 523 electoral votes to Landon's 8. FDR won primarily because he appealed to the forgotten man whom he never forgot. He controlled Congress, but the Supreme Court kept blocking his programs, so he proposed a shocking plan that would add a member to the Supreme Court for every existing member over the age of 70 for a maximum possible total of 15 members. For once, Congress voted against him because it did not want to lose its power, and Roosevelt was ripped for trying to become a dictator. FDR's court-packing scheme failed, but he did get some of the justices to start voting his way, including Owen J. Roberts, formerly regarded as a conservative. So FDR did achieve his purpose of getting the Supreme Court to vote his way. However, his failure of the court packing scheme also showed how Americans still did not wish to tamper with the sacred justice system. During Roosevelt's first term, unemployment went down from 25% in 1932 to 15%, yet it leveled off there. Reorganization Act of 1939 gave him limited powers for administrative reforms, including the key new executive office in the White House. The Hatch Act of 1939 barred federal administrative officials, except the highest policymaking officers, from actively politically campaigning and soliciting. Foes of the New Deal condemned its waste, citing that nothing had been accomplished. Critics were shocked by the try-anything attitude of FDR, who had increased the federal debt from $19 million in 1932 to $40 million in 1939. It took World War II, though, to really lower unemployment, but the war also created a heavier debt than before. New Dealers claimed that the New Deal had alleviated the worst of the Great Depression. FDR also deflected popular resentment against business and may have saved the American system of free enterprise, yet business tycoons hated him. He provided bold reform without revolution and later would guide the nation through a titanic war in which the democracy of the world would be at stake.
Are you done?
Are you done?